Right. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm glad that you could join us today for LPC's Coffee and Collaboration. Super excited to be talking about crisis communications today. To me, it's one of those things that you hope you don't really have to utilize very much in your job, in your role, wherever you might be. But gosh, when a crisis hits, being able to have a plan and to know what you're going to do to proceed forward is just so very important. And I'm really excited that today we have two industry experts who've been through the throes of a few crises in their day that are going to share their expertise with us. But before they get started, and while you're all getting situated on the call, I just wanted to run over a few things with you guys if this is your first time to join us for Coffee and Collaboration. If you'll take a look at your screen, I just wanted to highlight down in the bottom left hand of your screen, there's a little instant message chat bubble. If you click on that, it will pop up a chat sidebar. So if you have any questions throughout, please go ahead and jot those questions down and send those to us, and we'll ask Cindy and Daren at the end of the chat to answer any questions you may have. If you have comments or want to, high five someone during it, feel free to make those, comments in the chat conversation tab as well. We want this to be interactive as much as we can, and so we just highly encourage you guys to ask questions and comment there. At the very top of the left-hand corner, you'll notice there's kind of three little faces, and that's just a list of who the participants are. So if you are curious or just want to see who's on, see if any of your friends made it on, you can click on that and it'll open up the participant section. Other than that, if you have any other questions throughout or have any technical difficulties, again, I'm a writer, so I don't claim to be a guru of the IT stuff, but I'll try to help you figure out the best I can. We're so excited that you could be here today. I'd like to start off by introducing our speakers. We have Cindy Cunningham with us today and Daren Williams. They are going to spend a little more time as they open up their part of the presentation, introducing themselves and telling you a little bit about what they do and who they work for. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cindy to get things started.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Cindy Cunningham with the National Pork Board. I'm the Assistant Vice President of Communications here at the National Pork Board. I really focus on three primary areas: crisis management, issues management, and media relations. I've been with the pork programs for about 26 years now, and during that time have had the opportunity, sometimes a challenge, but the opportunity to deal with a number of issues and also several major crises in the pork industry. And I look forward to visiting with you a little bit more today about some of the things that Daren and I have had the opportunity to work on together, as well as some of our issues that relate specifically to our species groups. And I'm glad that you've joined us today. Daren?
Good morning. Thank you, Cindy. I hope you can see me because my screen just went blank, but if you can see me and hear me, I'll just pretend I can see you. It's great to join everyone today. I'm the Senior Executive Director of Issues Management and Media Relations here at the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. We like to keep the titles short and to the point. And in that role, I direct all of our issues in crisis planning efforts, our media relations, obviously, in our grassroots advocacy program, the Masters of Beef Advocacy. And before NCBA, I was with Fleischman Hillard in Kansas City for 10 years, working in the food and agribusiness division there, which is, Cindy, where I think you and I first met, and worked on a variety of different issues and crises there, mostly ag-related, but even everything from an oil spill to the OxyContin crisis. So a wide variety of different experiences, both within and outside of food and agriculture.
So we want to talk about our agenda today. Daren and I have spent some time working on this, trying to bring to you some information that takes a little bit different perspective. We're not necessarily going to give the traditional crisis planning presentation that he and I often do. to help folks be prepared. We're looking at it from your role as an editor, as a publisher, as a writer, as someone in the ag media, and dealing with a crisis. So we're going to talk first about ag issues and crises that we've had in the past, just to kind of set the stage, a little bit of a level set, if you will. And then we want to talk about your role in a crisis. How do you cover the situation? How do you deal with it? And things that you, as you and your company, need to be aware of as you get into that. We'll use foot and mouth disease as an example of some of the crisis planning in the livestock industry, but again, keeping in mind this time what your role would be in a foot and mouth disease outbreak. And then we'll talk about what can I do today to be prepared for that crisis situation. Daren and I are going to jump back and forth on this presentation, and we may jump in on each other's slides as well, but we look forward to your questions, and hopefully we'll get you some good information today. So I'll turn things back to Daren.
Yeah, one of the first things we wanted to do is distinguish between what is an issue versus a crisis. That has come up a lot throughout my career. How do we define a crisis, and how do you know when you're in crisis mode? These definitions are kind of our working definitions of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. The issue is a condition or an event, internal, external to the organization, which has a significant effect on the functioning performance of the organization and the future of our interests. So when we, think about issues in the beef industry, things like antibiotic use is an issue. It's an ongoing situation where you have a need to continuously communicate about what the industry is doing to address the issue, but we're not in full-on crisis mode. A crisis exists when an organization like ours or an industry like the beef industry or the pork industry is confronted with a major event that really gets that immediate and intense attention and really threatens to negatively affect your people, your products, or your reputation. And you think about the classic case studies of the Tylenol tampering situation and how that company responded to that. I've always looked at as both issues and crises as an opportunity as well as a challenge. An opportunity to define who you are as an organization, who you are as an industry, but obviously can be a challenge that, if not handled well, can really impact you negatively in a lot of different ways, financially first and foremost. So when you think about some of the different ag crises and issues we've dealt with over the years, actually, Cindy, I realized I left probably the first one I worked on off of here, and that was the Alar and apples issue in February of 1989. If anybody on the call is old enough to remember that, it was when the Natural Resources Defense Council, an organization that's still around today and most recently causing issues for the beef industry in Washington, D.C., came out and said that 1,500 children a year were going to contract cancer from drinking apple juice or eating apples. And the onslaught that followed and was fueled by Meryl Streep and her group Mothers and Others Against Pesticide. The reason I still have not seen a Meryl Streep movie to this day and won't go see The Post is because she personally put a lot of apple farmers out of business with what basically amounted to a bad science food scare. But from mad cow disease in 2003 to the most recent issues with H1N1 and avian influenza, we've certainly have our share of issues in the food and ag industry, and I think particularly in the livestock industry.
So as we talk about how we plan, just a little bit of background on how your associations, National Cattlemen's Beef Association, National Pork Board, and all the folks who are building crisis plans, what we do, we wanted to share that with you as well. So there are a number of crisis plans, and planning and preparedness is really important to a successful outcome of any kind of an issue or a situation. In the pork industry, for instance, I wanted to share with you, we look at things from a unified standpoint. We have several organizations within the pork industry that all work and function separately, but partner where we're allowed to by law in crisis situations. So the National Pork Board, the National Pork Producers Council, our state pork associations, the American Association of Swine Veterinarians, as well as the U.S. Meat Export Federation. The really cool thing about the ability to partner and have a unified direction in a crisis is the ability to move forward. And having thought about that now, before we get into a crisis situation, how we're going to respond, what are those, first of all, what are those issues, then building that plan and determining now how we'll respond allows us during a crisis situation to be able to really move more rapidly, be more nimble, and also be more effective in resolving that situation. The end goal of any crisis is to return to business as usual as quickly as possible, and that is the same whether you're talking about an on-farm situation, whether you're talking about something that impacts the entire industry, or whether you're talking about any crisis in general, really. So also in the pork industry, we have 4 different crisis plans that we operate from. The master plan, if you will, kind of think of it as the umbrella plan, is the national plan, and that includes and encompasses those organizations listed above there, and we work together to deal with any variety of issues and crises that may be impacting us. We have a plan for our state associations, so they specifically can have things tailored to what they need at the state level. What we need at the national level, our audiences, all those things are different than what they're going to need at the state level, but those plans need to feed into each other. And then our farm level plan actually is designed for our pork producers specifically. They can go through about a 2-hour program. Basically, it's a video game. It's all online, and answer questions specific to their farm and build a farm-level crisis plan. So at the end of that 2-hour period, they hit print, and they've got a plan that is specific to their site. If it is a tornado or a fire or something more tragic than that, or totally different in scope and nature, they've got a plan. They know how to deal with those things. And then also, there are a lot of pigs shown in the pork industry, and we're very excited about our show pig folks with us. And we wanted to make sure when you've got that many pigs and that many people together that they also have a plan in place that can assist them in any kind of concern or area of concern. The crisis plans that we have are all built on the same framework for the pork industry. This is something I think that you'll see throughout, across the board as you look at other industries as well. The next slide really shows us kind of the bottom line, if you will, for our crisis plans. These plans, it seems pretty basic in nature, a lot like TSA, if you will, but we know what resources we can allocate. We know what the situation is. We can quickly and easily share that situation with others around us, other staff or others in the varying organizations, to help us identify, what we need to do specifically. So green is a pretty normal day. Everybody likes green as opposed to the white that I think a lot of us have seen lately. Everybody likes green. It's just a normal day. As we start to see things elevate, we move into that yellow zone. Orange, things get pretty intense, and we save that red zone really for a major, like foot and mouth disease, a major outbreak or crisis in the pork industry. So examples, I said FMD for the red. Orange, if you think about H1N1 or as those outside of agriculture like to call it, swine flu. We were in orange level crisis for almost a year with that. A yellow is elevated. We'll see things like maybe an undercover video, or there are other situations that fall into that yellow, and then green, again, normal. It really helps us to be able to identify what are the resources we need, how do we utilize those resources, how do we deal with the situation, and then again, how do we get back to everybody who's involved in it, back to business as usual as quickly as possible. We really like to wall off that crisis, have just the core crisis team dealing with it so that the rest of the business can continue and move forward on behalf of the industry.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the real challenges, Cindy. It's amazing to me how much the system you have in place parallels ours. We also have a national issues and crisis management plan that we manage here at NCBA on behalf of the Beef Checkoff, and then we have a state level issues a crisis plan that's built on the same model, and we work with our state partners like the Kentucky Cattlemen's Association, I think that's on the call with us today, to implement that plan at the state level. And it really, when it comes to the state level plan, we think of it more of an issues management plan, because, as I suggested earlier, an issue well managed never becomes a crisis situation. So when we know an issue, if we're on top of an issue as it percolates up at the local or state level, and get on it and address the issue immediately and effectively, then maybe we never get to the point of a crisis situation. But if we're in crisis mode, for example, foot and mouth diseases, as Cindy said, would definitely be a red level for us as well. We're not going to leave that to the state to manage. Obviously, we'll join in to partner with them in managing a situation like that. So we have a very similar threat level system that we put in place a few years back. We've got a red level alert. FMD would certainly be in there. Orange level alert, I think we were in orange level with the and now infamous pink slime reporting by ABC News and subsequent fallout back in 2012. Yellow is just that caution level, or something that we're seeing that's emerging. I just put out a yellow level FYI to our states yesterday about an impending New York Times story on antibiotic use in cattle. That's what we would consider that, at least at this point, unless that story runs and creates additional issues. And then instead of a green level, Cindy, we have the vanilla level, which is just kind of boring. But yeah, sometimes boring is good. And it's good to occasionally have a vanilla day, and it doesn't seem like we get too many of those these days.
Yeah, I think we missed our slide on that. So there, Jennifer, there's the slide that kind of depicts the beef industry's plan that Daren just went through. So what does all this mean to you? And that's really what we're here for today. Let's talk about your role in a crisis. And as we prepared today, we wanted to kind of be in your shoes. So there are a number of things that you might want to think about, or that we thought would be good and valuable for you. So your role in a crisis as a reporter, an editor, a publisher. We also have associations online with us today, communications folks. What is it that you need to be thinking about? And the first thought probably is, wow, how do I get information in this crisis situation? And what do my readers need to know? And am I really getting all the information I want? Why can't I get what I need when I need it? And so we want to kind of talk about each of those a little bit individually, but our next slide is going to take us kind of into a new area or new counterpart. So let's talk about how we can successfully respond in that crisis. And I mentioned it before, we really think that successful outcome of a crisis situation is based around preparedness. Now, we try to identify what the issues are ahead of at the beginning of each year. Actually, we try to identify our vulnerabilities for that year and then try to build plans around those. But think about, as you build those relationships, as you learn all you can about key subjects and their response plans. So like the FMD plan that we'll talk about here shortly, which involves all of you. Also think about building your own crisis and issues response plan. How would you set up your response plan, your crisis plan? And if your usual channels aren't available in a crisis, say a tornado or an ice storm has taken out all the power, you still have to cover it, but you may need to be thinking about other things too, not just how do I cover it, but how do I actually make it all happen? Our next slide is going to talk a little bit about some roles that you may play in a crisis. Now, as a reporter and as a former reporter, I like to think about things from the reporter's standpoint. If I am covering this situation, how am I going to cover it? How am I going to get that information out? But there are other roles that you play that you may not even realize, what the situation is. So other media, and we've seen this a lot, Daren and I both, have seen ag media used as subject matter experts. If you think about the knowledge that you have about agriculture and the information that you have and are able to share with others, that really makes you a subject matter expert. A quick Google search on the pork industry, reporters in the pork industry, it's going to pop up a list of 2 or 3 different reporters, and quite often they are used as subject matter experts by other media who don't understand the pork industry. So we would love to be able to, at the association level, we'd love to be able to work with those other reporters, but we also trust that you understand our industry and are going to be able to carry that information forward. So think about, if somebody asks you questions, how are you going to respond to those? Farmers are going to rely on your publication. That's how you make your money, right? You want them to rely on your publication. But in time of need, they are really going to rely on your publication. So having the kind of information that allows them to make their decisions. I know during 1998, let's go back to the hog crisis, we had pork producers who were calling some of our reporters and actually talking through situations with them and asking them questions and using them personally, not just the publication, but personally to make some of those decisions. And then always, will you be that reliable, credible source of information? And forgive me if there's any weather people, forecasters or meteorologists on the call with us today, but will you be that reliable, credible source of information, or will you be the weatherman in the storm who's so excited that there's a crisis and they're trying to just, gin it up? And especially in the last few weeks, we've really seen that with cold temperatures and snow across pretty much the entire country. So how will you act and react, and what impact will that have on your traditional audience that you always talk to, but in some cases audiences that you may not even realize are using you as a source? If we go to the next slide, we'll take this just a little bit to a different level. Now, as a leader in your organization, whether it be the publisher, the editor, or reporter, there are things that you need to think about aside from just covering that story. What if you're in the crisis? What if the crisis involves you and includes you? We like to think first when we do our crisis planning especially with our farms, the first thing that we talk about is the people are the most important. After that, we've got to make sure that the pigs are well taken care of. And then the third thing is to make sure that we still have the opportunity to be in business after the situation. The same would hold true for you as well. Are any of my staff directly impacted by the crisis situation? Is there a power outage? Can they get here? How are they impacted by this? Will I be able to distribute through my normal channels? We rely so much on electricity and on the internet, and are those things available to us during a crisis? And if they're not, do you have a plan how you can reach out with your information? What can I do to help my readers? A lot of times, if the crisis is around you, say a weather-related crisis, your readers are also in crisis. So is there something that you can do to assist those folks? And then as you're thinking about and dealing with and potentially building your crisis plans, think about the short-term ramifications and the long-term ramifications. So if you have a situation where maybe you don't have electricity for a day or two and you've got to find a different way to connect to the internet and to distribute your information, that's a short-term ramification. But are there long-term ramifications? Did you lose advertisers? Did you lose sources? Don't just look at it from short-term. Look at it also from a long-term situation and how you can deal with it and how you can move forward. Because again, keeping in mind, at the end of that situation, we want to return to business as usual and do that as quickly as possible. Daren?
Yeah, I think FMD is a prime example of why that would be so important, Cindy, to return to business as usual as quickly as possible. Cindy and I have both spent, probably the better part of 2 decades now, working on planning for foot and mouth disease possible return to the United States. Some would say eventual return because in today's global society with people traveling around as much, it's oftentimes I scratch my head wondering how it hasn't happened to date. But it's certainly something that could disrupt and impact the livestock industry and affect every one of you on the phone. And something that we obviously spend resources preparing for good reason. The need to have a coordinated response, I think was really borne out in 2003 with the first case of mad cow disease in the United States, and what I think most people would consider to be the effectiveness of that response was the fact that we had the chief vet at the Department of Agriculture and all the way on down to every farmer and rancher and livestock producer in this country delivering the same message that your food is safe, that this did not enter the food supply, and that's what the consumer needed to hear and wanted to hear. And that really is the objective of the FMD cross-species team plan, is to have that coordinated response and have everybody singing from the same song sheet and saying the same thing. We all know consumers need to hear it multiple times. Our audiences need to hear it multiple times before they'll believe it. So we'll talk more about what that message is in a moment. But the effective, to respond effectively and maintain consumer confidence in their meat and milk supply during an FMD crisis, it would be all of our role to get that message out as quickly and as early as and often as possible. So we have three main goals for the cross-species team. Number one, to protect animal health and minimize the disease spread, and I think that's where ag media plays a really critical role, is getting information out about what is happening to help prevent the spread of disease. We need, and I've been in exercises, most recently one in Kansas, where we talked about the fact that there's going to be that one cattle producer who's not going to get the message and not hear the news and know that there's a situation and try to put some cattle on the truck and send them down the road when they should be holding them. And so getting that word out to help prevent the spread of disease is going to be so critical. Obviously, maintaining consumer confidence in meat and milk would help all of us, and then prevent supply disruption. We don't want empty meat cases. We don't want any empty milk shelves either. And communications is going to play a critical role in all of that. So here's the bottom line with the messages that we need to deliver to consumers. Your meat and milk are safe. It's FMD, as I'm sure you all know, is a very virulent animal health disease and a threat to the herd, but is not a threat to the human population. We need moms and dads to be confident that they can buy meat and milk and their family is going to be safe consuming it, whether or not it's been exposed in any way to foot and mouth disease. Working closely together is a message that we know resonates with consumers. We did some consumer testing on all of our messaging this year just to make sure we've got, that it's still effective. And one thing we know that consumers want to hear, and I think this proved itself in 2003 as well, is that the industry is working together with the Department of Agriculture, the government, maybe it might be Homeland Security in a case like a foot and mouth disease outbreak, to address the situation, stop the spread of the disease, and ultimately to protect the safety and availability of the food supply.
Daren, I'm going to stop you. I'm going to stop you right there and ask Jennifer to advance our slides one more slide so we keep everybody up to date on these messages. So I think we're on message 3 now, Jennifer. They should pop in.
I don't have any way to tell unless he gives me a nod, but I don't think he can see his PowerPoint, so.
I cannot see my PowerPoint.
Like the blind and the blind, I'm sorry.
If you want to just hit all the way down to the one more, and there, and then he can, go back one slide. Perfect.
Thanks, Cindy.
There you go, Daren.
So we were talking about the importance of delivering the message that we're all working together to address the issue. They also want to know that we're providing good care for the animals. They all certainly concerned about their safety and the health and safety of their family, but they are also concerned about the animals, and that would be, I think a challenge as we're trying to prevent the spread of disease, to talk about how we care for animals. But it's an important message we can't forget. And then finally, that we would direct them to resources like the USDA.gov website and the website that the F&D cross species team manages, foot and mouth disease info.org. And that is a mouthful, but you can also just type in fmdinfo.org to get to that website, which we are in the process of updating this year through the FMD cross species team. And we've got a call on Friday to discuss needed updates there. If you do visit that site today, it'll look like a site designed about 10 years ago, because it was designed about 10 years ago, right, Cindy? We want to make it as consumer friendly as possible. But again, your role will be critical. As Cindy mentioned earlier, we've got to get the word out quickly. We've got to reach farmers and ranchers with accurate info, as well as consumers with accurate info. And Cindy, your point about ag media being a source, just reminded me just this week in the Omaha World Herald, reading an article about quote-unquote alternative proteins. I saw Chuck Jolly quoted in the article as an expert resource, and I don't know if Chuck's on our webinar today, but a little shout out to Chuck there. So we're going to need your help calming the fear of consumers as well, and because we do know that what you write goes on the internet and searchable on Google and is going to reach a consumer audience. Obviously, we're all consumers, including farmers and ranchers. In some cases, you'll be a subject matter expert, and it's going to be get the information out as quickly and accurately as possible, and probably going to be an extended event that we would need to, probably consume most of our lives during, for several weeks and potentially months. And I think Cindy made a point earlier of the importance of keeping business going, continuity, in addition to addressing a crisis situation. So I know that's a challenge that we've dealt with by saying we have a team that's there for issues response, and then we've also got a team that's working on our ongoing communication, so they can continue that even in a crisis situation. You might think about how that would impact your organization.
So let's talk about how. Oh.
Back to you, I'd say.
Yep, let's talk about how we're going to build that crisis plan for you, and how you will actually start to build that crisis plan for your company. And again, keeping in mind you're going to have several roles, but as a business, how are you going to build that crisis plan? First thing, the basis to any crisis plan is to understand what the risks are. I mentioned our vulnerability assessment that we do every year. So assessing and understanding those risks and having them down. And that the easy way to think about this is, what are the things that keep me up at night? And chances are those are the risks or vulnerabilities that you may face in a crisis situation. So understand what they are, and then try to look at them from all sides. So one of the fun parts of my job, there are people here who would laugh at that, but is taking that worst case scenario or unexpected case scenario and figuring out how you're going to deal with it. So, if you talk about, today the power may go out, well, let's talk about the power may go out, the heat may go out, and I may not be able to drive into the office today. So don't just look at it as, we may lose power, but understand and look at all sides of it and worst case scenario, and then figure out what the resources are that you're going to need to deal with that situation, and stockpile them, or at least have them available. And resources could be financial, resources could also be physical in nature. A lot of times we consider resources to be like our staff and the available knowledge on a situation. Do we need research to help us learn more about this disease or about that situation? And then drill your response. As kids, we all go through fire drills and tornado drills, depending on what part of the country you live in, from kindergarten on out. And in kindergarten, you learn that you should, probably take the hand of the student next to you, and the teacher's leading you to, wherever the safe place is, under the flagpole or the safe place. And then each year you have practiced that drill and you understand that drill. By the time you get to be our age as adults, you know that if that fire alarm rings, you need to get to safety, and you need to be able to do it calmly and quickly. So the more that you drill your response, the easier it is for all of us to deal with that situation and respond to that. I like to watch how others handle similar situations. Clearly, Daren at NCBA and others and other species, we all work very closely together to support each other where possible. Clearly, we're competing proteins, but we want to make sure that we are doing what's right for the meat industry and the livestock industry. So how are we going to handle this situation, but how do others handle their situation, and what can I learn from them? You can have any kind of crisis situation and have teachable moments and learnings that you can implement into your crisis plan. And then really it's better to prepare in the calm than it is, in the storm itself. It's a lot easier to sit around the table and have a cup of coffee and, kick around what's the worst thing that could happen to us and how are we going to deal with it, than to call everybody into the conference room and have to deal with it today without having thought about it. So in how you build that plan, I think it's also very important. Daren's going to take you into the next step of that.
Yeah, I'm watching the time here too, so I'm going to go flip through these fairly quickly here, but just a couple of thoughts on who should be on your crisis management team. The bottom line is you need the people who can make decisions, the key decision makers in your organization, and commit resources to fixing whatever the situation is, the problem is. And then also key people who hold the keys to the communications vehicles to your various stakeholders. An example, I was working with Farmland Industries on an oil spill back in the late 1990s in southeastern Kansas, and we needed to secure water for a small little community in northeastern Oklahoma that had to shut off their water supply. Of course, the community was Nowata, Oklahoma. And so we had to call in Farmland Government Relations to contact the city of Bartlesville to see if we could get some water from them, and we sent tanker trucks down to pick up water from Bartlesville to take it to Nowata. So the dire news reports of no water in Nowata never actually came true. We kept the community in the water supply, and that was critical, really, to demonstrating the character of that company and what they were all about. And we needed to have government relations at the table from the very beginning, and we did because we had that plan in place. So just really think about those key people, those key decision makers, and then also those people who are key for communicating with your various audiences. And then probably wrap it up here with a couple of final thoughts is, I've written a lot of crisis plans and notebooks that are probably still sitting on a shelf in somebody's office. And to me, it all really comes down to a process. And as Cindy was saying earlier, then drilling that process so it becomes almost instinctual, that everybody in your organization knows as soon as they get the high sign that or they get an alert that something has gone wrong with the product or the organization, that they know what they're supposed to do first and they know what they're supposed to do next. Primarily probably contact somebody within communications function so we can get the word out to the crisis team. But you really drill that process in place, because I think one of the most effective things in crisis management over my years of experience is acting quickly and responding to the crisis and communicating directly with the audiences you need to communicate with before anyone else does. They need to hear, if you got bad news, they need to hear it from you. So it's just kind of a circular process of assessing, developing messages, training spokespeople, delivering messages, measuring the effectiveness of the delivery of those messages, and then repeat. Finally, a couple of lessons, and I have this quote from Mark Twain that I love. It says, "Always do right. It will gratify some and astonish the rest." And to me, I've often been thrust into, and I'm sure Cindy has too, situations where they bring in the communications team and they say, "Hey, we need you guys to fix this situation." And one of my first questions is, well, what are we doing to actually fix the situation? Then we can talk about it. But communications isn't gonna cover up, bad actions on the behalf of an individual or an organization or an industry. But it can communicate what that industry is doing or that organization is doing to address the situation and make it right by the people who are affected. Communicate early and often. sometimes that becomes a challenge because you don't know what's going on in the throes of a crisis early on. But you can always commit to doing the right thing and fixing the problem, even if you don't know exactly what the problem was. Focus on your intent and values as an organization, as an industry. What do we stand for? When we see an animal rights video, we say, you know what, we don't accept that either. We're on the side of the consumer for that, and we try to communicate those values, that we expect every animal to be treated properly, just as the consumer does, and one case of mistreatment is unacceptable. Remember that judgment is instant, and being reasonable comes later. We've probably all been in that situation where we're accused of something, or as an organization or an industry, and then I think the LR crisis is a great example. LR later determined by the World Health Organization to be not carcinogenic, but the judgment of the consuming public pouring their apple juice down the drain was instant and cost a lot of money to the industry and a lot of people their jobs. Finally, never lie or mislead. I probably shouldn't have to say that, but it's worth noting. The truth will eventually come out. So whether it's lying or misleading or just speaking before you have all the facts, you got to deal in the facts because they will eventually become known, and that's going to be the ultimate test.
So the bottom line in crisis management, really, we can recap it in kind of 3 quick bullets today. In a major ag crisis, we will all play a role. So your role covering it will be critical, but there will be other aspects of your role as well. You can make a difference in the outcome, and I think that is so important. In agriculture, we always want to help. We often have folks who are trying to help us, and we need to figure out roles for them, but you can make a difference in that outcome. And then clearly the time to prepare is now. Let's think about it today when we can have a cup of coffee and sit around and talk about what the situation is, as opposed to having to deal with it in a moment's notice when things have really exploded, if you will. And I know we're at 10:42. We've got about 3 minutes. I see there's a question there. It looks like it's for Daren, and it looks like it comes from Diane. Daren, do you want to take a second to explain how you were able to find out about the potential article that you just mentioned? And Diane wants to know if you have moles out there.
I can't see where that question is. My system's not working very well today. Well, Diane, we were contacted by the reporter asking questions about the story, and actually lined up. Someday maybe I'll be able to share more details on the story, but we actually lined up a 2-day visit to a feed yard to have an extensive, transparent, and open conversation about antibiotic use at that level in the beef industry. And it remains to be seen whether or not that was a good strategic call. But I think that's the expectation and the norm today with the media and consumers, is that we're transparent and have an open and honest conversation about the questions that people have about food production. So we're doing it.
I think we've probably got time for about one more question. If anyone would like to type their question, here comes a question from Katie. It says, curious on your opinion, do you think that in a crisis, the animal ag meat industry is scrutinized more than ever, more than other food sectors? I'm sorry. If so, why do you think that is? Well, I'm going to take the first stab at that, Daren, and I think that we are always scrutinized, and we should be scrutinized at what we're doing, and we should be doing the right thing and telling the right story and being accurate and effective in how we tell that story. We're in agriculture, we're in the meat industry, so we're going to feel like the target is on us when there is a situation. So sometimes we feel like that scrutiny is more intense on us than it is on other industries. If we were in those other industries, we may feel the same thing. The bottom line, as Daren talked about, we've got to do the right thing, and we have to be able to show that we're doing the right thing and be able to tell that we're doing the right thing. Daren, did you want to add to that?
No, I think that's a great summary, Cindy. Yes, it feels like we're under a microscope, but I just think that's the new norm. And every industry does face the same questions. I can tell you that from working on the OxyContin crisis, and you think about the pharmaceutical industry today and the challenges they face in dealing with the opioid crisis. A lot of scrutiny there too. So it sometimes depends on where your focus is. And sometimes we do think, everybody's talking about us and about, the latest issue within our industry, and then you'll have a conversation with a neighbor and find out that nobody really is paying attention to it. But we just have to be prepared to deal with any situation, and I think communications from the organizations, communications from your publications out to your readers and to consumers in general is critical in addressing any issue or any crisis.
I think on behalf of Daren and myself, I would like to thank all of you for joining us today. The Livestock Publications Council is always excited to have Coffee and Collaboration. We really appreciate the work that Jennifer Scheidt puts into this, but what makes it work is that you take the time to join us, and I know that Jennifer's got some things that she'll say as we wrap up, but we appreciate you being here. Daren and I would be happy to answer any other questions along the way if you think of things after this call as well.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you guys joining us today. Cindy and Daren, you guys did a fabulous job, and we're very fortunate to have you among our group to be able to educate us from your perspective. Certainly information that you just can't get from anyone. So I appreciate all the hard work that you guys put into taking care of the livestock industry, and like I said, we're just lucky to have you. I'm thankful for you and what you do. Just a reminder that this recording of this YouTube or of the Skype will be on YouTube, and we will share that on Facebook with you all. I apologize for the mix-ups on the slide advancement. Daren really was blind with how he was presenting today because he can't see his screen, and thus I was not following his lead very well. So thanks for your patience, and we'll see you next month. Information will be out soon about our next chat. Have a great day.
Thanks all. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Thanks, Cindy.